there. Welcome to the eLearning Champions Pod. I'm Shalini, and I'm thrilled to have with us a true pioneer in learning and technology, the one and only Elliot Masie. Elliot coined the term e-learning and has been revolutionizing corporate learning for over 35 years. He's the chair of the Learning Collaborative and leads a coalition of 75 global organizations shaping the future of learning. Elliot is not only a dynamic speaker and educator, but also, hold your breath, a Tony nominated Broadway producer. He heads Mazie Innovations in Saratoga Springs, New York, driving innovation and excellence. And we are thrilled to have you with us, Elliot. A very warm welcome to you and to all our listeners. And I'd also like to introduce uh, our other speaker for today, Dr. RK, who will be having these conversations with Elliot. Dr. RK is the CEO and co-founder of CommlabIndia. He nurtured CommlabIndia from concept to the commercial success that it is today. And he's responsible for formulating business strategy and nurturing client relationships. RK is an entrepreneur at heart. He has well over 35 years of experience in sales, corporate training, university teaching, and e-learning. And he is passionate about learning and technology-enabled learning. And it's a great joy to have both of you here today. So with that, I'm handing over the stage to you and minimizing my presence.
Thank you. So just to repeat my question, Elliot, what exactly happens in Masie Lab? What kind of research?
What we've been doing, and just like you, we've been in this field many, many, many years. And we try to do two things. We don't evaluate or endorse products. Rather, what we try to look at is how does the employee of a company or a student in university, is their learning different when they're learning with technology? To be honest, what we're doing right now is e-learning, meaning you are in India. I happen to be in Dublin, Ireland. I'm doing a fellowship with Trinity College. You see it in the background there. So technology is letting us do something which is a bit different than obviously if you and I were just sitting having a cup of tea together and drinking. So we've been focused a lot on how is it different? Not is it good or bad, but how does it change? I'll give you an example of one of the things I'm looking at now. What happens to curiosity when you're working with a very powerful AI or search engine? Okay, so if I type something and it gives me many answers, does it make my curiosity go up or down? Does it focus me or does it confuse me? And so we're looking at that. We're also very intrigued about, and it's the connection of why I'm in the world of e-learning and the world of Broadway, is storytelling. That's what we have in common. Any good teacher you have, and it could be your teacher when you were 7 years old, when you were 27, or it could be your uncle that you used to sit on the floor and listen to him tell stories when you were a child. Those are all storytellers. And I am convinced that while the technology is important and it's always changing, people learn because the story is a good story that's told well. And the technology can help, or in many cases, the technology can destroy the story,
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so that's what we're looking at. And right now, I'm very intrigued about global learning, which is, let's say we have a good example. Let's say we have a company like KPMG, and they have their offices in Dublin for Europe, and they're doing a program, and they have people who are in India, people who are in Mexico, people who are in France, and people who are in China. Uh, how does global learning change? Because we're influenced by who our teachers were, how we learned growing up, how we learned at university. So I'm very intrigued in this global world. How do we build learning that works globally, not just in the language that they understand, but also in the culture of learning that is comfortable for them?
Right. And there's an additional dimension of two cultures or more than two cultures learning together.
Or even the same culture but two ages.
Right.
You put together a learner who is 22,
Hmm.
and they never have their hand empty from their phone. Okay.
Right.
And then you put somebody, I'm 74, and I have a phone, okay, but I actually make phone calls on it occasionally. And, but how do we learn together? Because I
Right.
think the power of learning, particularly at work, is when we learn collaboratively.
Correct.
When we learned, yeah. So it's that culture is different, the age might be different, the language might be different, and I know it's probably not appropriate to say, but I will. Even our religion as we grew up, what was the spirit of learning in our religion? And for
Yeah.
some religions, you never asked a question. And other religions, it was a big part of how you learned. So we're
Correct.
influenced by all those
Yeah.
pieces.
Yeah, it resonates. My early days going to Sunday school or vacation Bible school,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So do you undertake consultancy projects for individual organizations?
When you get to be a certain age and you've had a certain degree of success, some people retire. Um, I will never retire, but I follow the words of Ken Blanchard, a very famous
Okay,
author.
yeah.
And Ken says, don't retire, refire. Fire yourself up.
Right.
So I don't do consulting. In fact, we made enough money that the work that I do is through our foundation. And
Okay.
I don't do big conferences anymore because there
Okay.
are many great conferences I go and speak at. A lot of what I do is to try to be an influence person. Now, we think of
Okay.
influencers as 21-year-olds, but you have a certain influence when, like
Right.
both of us, we've been around long enough that people think what we say is maybe right. It may not be, but
Correct.
we look like it is right, and
Yeah.
but it gives you an opportunity to ask very pointed questions. I'll give you an example, and I don't take
Please.
full credit for it, but if you look at some of the AI tools that we have been tracking, and you look at uh, Anthropic's Claude, if anybody's ever gone in there, at the end of every statement, it asks you, are you okay with this or do you have more questions? I love that. I
Mm.
love that because, as an expert, whenever somebody asks me a question, I don't want to end with an exclamation mark. And that's the way in which you create a pivot table. I end with a question. So what else do you want to know about pivot tables?
Right.
So some of what I think I can do as an influencer is to ask questions that push push people to think about things a little different. And the world is changing so rapidly right now with AI, with politics, with changes in the economies. um, I feel I can make an influence in a few places. As I said, you don't retire, you refire. Yeah.
Refire.
Yeah.
That's nice. I think I should also keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Elliot. There's one question which I would like to start off with is about leadership, which is the theme of today's conversation. So, how do you define leadership in L&D,
Yeah.
and how do you see it different or similar to other leadership positions in an organization?
It's a very current topic for me. Okay. And I'm not wanting to be political or partisan, but last week, many of the learning and development people in United States organizations were dealing with employees who were very worried about, with a new president and new policies around diversity and inclusion, what did that mean for them, for
Mm-hmm.
their jobs, and the like. I think the role of a leader is to be able to ask and to manage a direction and a efficiency and a purpose to what we do. So in the L&D space, leaders for me have always been involved in serving really three purposes. One is
Mm-hmm.
help the employees have the skills to succeed in their jobs. Secondly, help the employees develop to be able to do their next job or more jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
the third is to map changes in the organization and the jobs to how our employees are ready to do those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It takes patience, it takes empathy, it takes, I think, science. I think we need to understand the science of organizations. You certainly know the science of building effective programs. And then it has one more piece. It needs courage.
Yes.
Because L&D leaders, to be honest, we're I don't mean to put you down, but we're very important, like the people in charge of fixing the elevators in our buildings. Meaning, if they're not there, wow, stuff stops. But they don't have a lot of power, but they have a lot of capacity to make better. So most
Right.
of our L&D leaders, they don't have big budgets. They
Mm-hmm.
they get their money from the businesses. They don't have big power, but they are so important in doing what we say, building the organization and like. And now I think they are even more important in coping with the changes that happen, which means it's totally important. Maybe I'll even jump ahead to a question you were thinking of asking me. If the learning development leaders aren't learners, they aren't going to succeed. So you have
Correct.
to be willing to be a learner. I have a friend who is a major CEO of a corporation, and then they left there, and now they're actually in another corporation as head of human resources and learning. They put themselves on a 5 hour a week AI power course. So every
Mm.
week they spend 5 hours just in AI trying to learn it and understand it, whether to accept it or to reject it or to do the like. So we have to be learners. And sometimes sometimes it's so busy they don't, I remember meeting
Yeah.
somebody who was building e-learning.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually in Bangalore for a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and this person was very excited about their program. And I asked her just a question. I said, "This is great. When was the last time you took an e-learning class?" And she put her hand over her eyes, and it's been about 4 years because there was no time in how her job was done for her to actually be a learner. So
Right.
Uh, to be honest, she needed to take one
Yes.
to get a little bit better. So that, yeah, so it takes
Yeah.
that level of courage in there too. Yeah.
So first thing is be able to keep the employees up to date on skills and knowledge, then be able to predict what they would require in future, and also provide for that training, and then be able to monitor or be on top of the change curve and see how the company is adapting to it, and therefore how.
Yeah.
And the last one, as you very clearly and emphatically said, is that we need to be learners and we need to learn, probably lead by example.
Yeah. And RK, can I add one more?
Yes,
We
please.
need to understand business. We need to
Correct.
understand business. I've had the honor of helping start up and being an adjunct teacher at a program at Wharton and University of Pennsylvania for mid-career to get
Mm-hmm.
them a equivalent of a PhD in learning and much of an MBA in business.
Mm.
Because you have to understand business. You have to understand You have to even be able to talk the numbers
Right.
of business.
Yes.
And I find it interesting. I always talk to new MBA students about where they're going to work. And they all want to work at Goldman Sachs or a venture company and
Right.
make $1 billion. And I said, okay, well, when you fit, after you do that and you're only 28, what will you do next? I said, you ought to think about becoming a director of talent or of learning. And they look at me like I'm crazy, like you ought to start a shoe shine store.
Right.
And I said, no, you don't understand it. It's very easy for technology to do a lot of the pieces of the financial side that you think you're really smart at.
Right.
The people side of things is going to require a lot of understanding of business and of data and of psychology and of people. And yes, we'll use technology as part of that. So I actually wish we could make learning or talent a bigger part of what was on the mind of business people. But until we do, we need to make business
Do it.
more on the mind of our
Yes.
learning people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. That actually resonates with what I experienced, because I came from a line function of sales and marketing. And I always found that, I mean, when I started my career, it was training and development. And we used to use, transparencies or an OHP,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure you remember those days, uh, writing with,
Yeah.
yeah. So they tend to get too involved into the jargon of learning when they speak with stakeholders.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, that's a very important. It's a very important fact. I want to ask you a related question here. When you gave me the example of that elevator person who may not have a lot of power, but he does have a power of stalling things, of stopping things. Uh, he may be a small cog in the whole,
Yeah.
system, but a very critical cog, if I may say so.
Yeah.
So you have given an analogy like that with L&D. I always wondered, and when Aleka told me that I was going to, speak with you, I wanted to ask you this question. That is, there are so many other support functions, staff functions, so to speak. So you have finance, you have HR, you have IT. I wonder why learning has to do so much of selling within the organization,
Yeah.
when
I
probably
yeah.
it is the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, let me be use my courage to answer this. Our role model, sadly, is school. Is
Right.
school. We use the terms of school. So we say, oh, Brajesh we hired Brajesh. He's been in IT. Maybe someday he would be a leader in our company. Okay. So what do we think about? We think about sending him to a class or an
Yeah.
academy or
Right.
program. Now, from my experience, those are all good and they're a part of the puzzle. But if you talk to Brajesh and he says to his wife, well, I'm going to go to this class or this academy and I'm taking this class. And she says, is there an exam? And they bring the
Right.
mindset of school in.
Hmm.
But let's imagine that Brajesh has a cousin in England, okay? And the same thing happened. His cousin was seen in IT, and they say, we're now going to give you a set of experiences to get you to be ready to be a leader in 12 months. And it will include following one of our leaders for a while. It will
Hmm.
include a project that you need to do. And yes, and there will be some training that you need to do. And here are 2 books you might want to read. And here's somebody who recently retired, but they're going to be your mentor. I guarantee you that his cousin will do better than he will. Okay.
Yes.
Because the model that we have is of learning rather than education. Meaning, I think what's an interesting activity you or your customers could do at some point is go to the cafeteria where people are having tea, which we wish we were having right now,
Yes.
and find 5 of them randomly and ask each person, how did you learn to do your job well? Not how did you learn to do your job? How did you learn to do your job well? Well, RK, do you want to know that many of them are not going to say they went to the class?
Correct.
They're going to say, I had a good manager.
Right.
They are maybe even say, in the church that I went to, there was a course in leadership that I took when I was 20, and I'm thinking about that. Or they may say, this is a funny one, I had a really bad manager, but I
Right.
watched what they did, and I'm not doing that at all. Or I made a mistake, because part of how we learn is when we make mistakes. So I think it's really important for us. We slow down because we try to run schools rather than try to engage to create a learning culture, which includes good courses, good e-learning, good books, but it also has to include experiences. If we had enough money, simulations for them to do. If we had even an opportunity seeing how it's done in another company or in another part of the business.
Correct.
That's how we go. The best way of saying it is we all know people who've had children, okay? All of them have learned their language and to control going to the bathroom. None of that required PowerPoints.
Correct.
None of it required
Yes.
PowerPoints. It was done organically. It was done with the parent and the relatives and the brothers and the sisters. It was done experientially in that sense. And I think we forget how we as humans learn. We do learn in a more organic way through
Correct.
our experiences. Yeah.
So you mean to say that because we come with this kind of mindset, uh, the stakeholders don't really take us seriously as a.
Yeah, yeah. I've been in many rooms, meeting rooms all around the world, and
Hmm.
I asked the question, what's the best learning experience you've had since joining this company? They
Hmm.
rarely talk. They might talk about a teacher that was great.
Right.
They might say,
Right.
"Oh gosh, Roseanne was wonderful," or Dr. Schwartz was amazing.
Right.
But they rarely say, "I took that class." And I'm
Right.
not insulted. They don't often say, "I took an e-learning program.
Right.
But
Hardly.
yeah, but it is the blend of those that makes there. And so I think our problem is, as long as we're creating academies or courses alone,
Hmm.
they're in the administrative task, the way a headmaster would be, of running that academy, but they're not
Right.
necessarily the person in charge of growing their people.
Correct.
And
So
I know that's
yeah.
provocative, but you've got to balance. You have to do both. And yeah,
Yeah, actually, listening to you, we even now say it's classroom training.
yeah, yes, yeah,
So immediately those memories of sitting in a classroom.
yeah.
Uh, okay, so that's very interesting, Elliot. It's very,
Yeah.
very thought-provoking.
Well, let me give you a global example. I was one of the
Please.
first people to go as an American and teach a class in Vietnam. Okay,
Hmm.
and it was around the early stages of technology, and I was so used to, as I've done in America and I've done in different cities in India. I go in and I say, "Are there any questions?" And there are usually questions. I said, "Are there any questions?" There was not a single question. And I was stunned because I was supposed to be there for 3 hours, and this was only 45 minutes into it, and there were no questions. So let's take a break. And I went outside and I asked the person who brought me in all the way from New York, why are there no questions? He said, in our culture, it would be insulting to ask you a question.
Absolutely like Indian.
Okay, well, I was being nice. I was in Vietnam, so I didn't get into into India,
Yeah.
but you knew what I was doing there.
Yes, yes,
So I said,
absolutely.
okay, we're going to do something interesting. So I put together little pieces of paper and I gave it around. And I said, now get together with two other people in groups of three and write down three things that it would be important for us to talk about.
Mm.
Okay, and then we're going to compete to who has the best ones. Well, we came back, RK, the energy went way up. And people
I
jumped
can
up and said,
I can
and it
imagine.
took about two times. They said, I have a question. Okay. But I had to change the culture because as
Mm.
long as, oh, and by the way, I had my jacket. I took my jacket off. Okay. Because I had to change the culture a little bit because in their culture, as you know, in India, that university student is good at writing down the notes and following
Mhm.
along and nodding, and maybe a brave one will ask a question or go see the faculty member. But the culture wasn't a collaboration culture, it was a lecture culture. And so I
Mm.
needed to break that,
Break
you
that.
know. And they were worried that I was breaking it. And then they kept asking me to come back, which I was busy. So I only went back one more time. But it's an
Okay.
interesting example
It is. It is.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, a similar kind of thing happens even in the Middle East.
Yeah.
If you had any experience, it'll be very similar. Uh,
Yes.
so probably the colonial legacy of just listening to a learned person, you know, we were
Yep.
all ruled by the British, and they wanted to make administrators, clerks out of the locals. So don't
Yes.
ask questions, just do it. And by
Yeah.
heart it, you don't need to understand, you know?
Yeah, and some of it is how we create the format. I had the honor of working with Dr. Kim. He was head of the World Bank for many
Hmm.
years. Before that,
Hmm.
he was president at Dartmouth. And he found that when he showed up and he was president of the World Bank, people wanted to hear what he said, but they generally didn't know how to interact with him. So he would always, before he did a big meeting, he would get about 10 people together and they would sit in a circle and they would have some tea. And he would say, tell me what's going on in your country. And, and by the time they got into the room, now they were ready to interact
Right,
differently. So some of it is our culture and some of it is what we're comfortable with and how we respect our experts. But I got to tell you, when I'm with an expert, the best moment is when their lecture ends. And if I had my way, they should have your group make it into an e-learning and send it to me. Okay. Because the best moment is when that's over and now we have a conversation.
right.
Because now I can ask, this is the big piece. I can go from talking about content to
Mm.
content and context. And context is the story behind the story.
Right.
Why is it done that way? Somebody asked me one time, why do you use the at key in a spreadsheet? Like,
Hmm.
it's all the way up at the top. And I say, it was interesting. My friend Bob Frankston invented VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet. Okay, he wanted the, and in the old days, the at key wasn't at the top. It was a control thing to get to it. But there's often a backstory behind why something is, why it works that way. And that often doesn't come from the lecture. It comes from the interaction and the conversation and the projects that people do with that.
So it's very, very interesting, and I could quickly understand because I have been doing classroom training for many years before e-learning. So I know how important it is to, calm them down, make them open up, start talking. That's when the maximum learning takes place,
Yeah.
and it remains permanent or relatively permanent. How do we bring this kind of, uh, you know, how should I say it, interaction or collaboration into e-learning, which is essentially self-paced?
Yeah. Well, I go back to that word that I used earlier on in our conversation, which is storytelling.
Right.
Okay. I like to tell people we've got an online set of stories that are going to help you do your job. Oh, really? So I don't say I have 4 modules or I have 3 parts. I said I have some stories about the power that comes from X, Y, or Z. Okay, uh, because I think what happens a little bit in e-learning is people see it as a an obstacle course. They see it as a ladder to climb, you know, and so that's why what's with I guess I'm saying something publicly here. Very often we give people video. The learner wants to run it at 1.5 speed, not one, or at 2.
Yes.
Okay, they still want to, but they want to get to the end of the ladder there. I think it's really important to focus on the story in there as well, because that's what you remember. That's what you take away. And I sometimes think we don't deal with the story. I'll give you a wonderful example how it failed for me. Because I'm in the world of theater, I was very excited when somebody sent me a free coupon to watch Steven Spielberg do a master class in directing.
Wow.
Steven Spielberg, oh my gosh, this was wonderful. And it was 10 sessions, RK. So I was very excited. So I clicked on the first one and I sat there and I was taking a few notes and I watched the first one. It was pretty good. And then I watched the second module about 8 minutes and then I stopped. I never went back. He had wonderful stories, but we put him in a package that wasn't exciting. We diluted his story in a way that I felt like he was reading the slides rather than telling the story. There wasn't somebody like right now. I'm hoping I'm doing a good job, but part of the reason I'm a good job is you're asking me questions that are provocative and are interesting and flow from what we were doing.
Right.
So I think it's really important that we go back to honoring the story. And as we add more technology, we will get more of our stories online. Claude and some of the other ones, I think we're seeing a little bit in OpenAI. They're actually making that when you do a search. In the old days, we got 14 or 45 bullets we could look at on our
Right.
Google search. Now, increasingly, the learner doesn't want it. They want a summary of everything. The other day, I started something. My wife thought it was really sort of interesting. Uh, I do AI summarizes all my email that came in the night before. And wow, I got about 45 minutes back from that, and so I think it's interesting that we'll have to figure out how we use the power of technology with the power of good teaching and good building of learning experiences there.
Right, right. Elliot, this is a 45-minute session, but those two girls have taken a lot of our time. How good are you for time? You're
Oh, I'm
okay?
fine. I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay,
I'm
great.
fine.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is a very interesting thing. So do you mean to say that when I listen to you about storytelling, it looks like a totally different instructional approach? The very structure, format, everything seemed to be different. Is that, did I
Well,
understand it correctly?
it is a little bit. Remember my other thing I do in life is Broadway, but I'm a big fan of Bollywood. Okay.
Okay.
Now you go to a Bollywood show, and there are certain things that are predictable. Okay,
Right.
no matter what happens, there'll be dancing in at
Correct.
the end. They're symbolic things. I keep wanting to be able to walk on top of a moving train.
Right.
But I haven't figured out how to do that. But then what makes one Bollywood better than another is the story and the acting that goes on
Right.
there. So I'm saying, yes, we have to accept there's certain things that are always going to be there. I like to think about them as the science of learning rather
Mm,
than the structure of learning.
mm, mm.
Okay, which means you could build two people could build the same e-learning program very, very differently. Okay.
Correct.
I know that every Broadway show that I am part of starts differently. It has different music. It has a different pace. It has a different tempo. Now, they all last about the first act, 1 hour and 10 minutes. It's a lot about how often people have to go to the bathroom and they want to sell some drinks in the middle. And I understand all of that. But in e-learning, we ought to accept the science of learning. We need clear objectives. We need clear outcomes. We need to challenge or interact or engage, and it's hard to engage uh, digitally. You know, we need to deal with the fact that many people will get confused before they get to be competent. So, how do we deal with confusion? But if we follow that science, we can build each one differently. You know,
Mm.
it's the same way. Let's say I'm a cook, and I am a wonderful cook. Not only do I want to make different meals, but I don't want them all looking the same.
True.
You know, and I will tell you that's a big difference of a restaurant. You know, they know how to bring you different foods, but they are all, I mean, I fell in love when I was in Bangalore, I fell in love with dosa. Okay.
Dosa.
Sadly, many of the Indian restaurants in the United States don't do dosa on their menu, you know. But when they see me coming in, the dosa, they know how to make it. And they go, there's the dosa man, you know. But it's an interesting element of how do you have the visual elements be different in a meal? You know, so, you
Mm.
know, if every dish looks exactly the same,
Mm.
I'm not as motivated. And so I
Correct.
think we have to do a better job of constructing it to look differently. And now, and this is a big challenge for all of us in the educational technology business, our learners are impatient. They want things to be over quickly. So
Mm.
here I am producing a Broadway show that lasts 2 hours and 12 minutes with an intermission. The average young person wants to have a TikTok level story that's over in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay, now I can't do that, but I have to listen to that. So some of our shows are getting a little shorter
Shorter.
in that. I also have to think about am I teaching them for immediate understanding or for beginning understanding? Uh, what's the role of practice? I get excited about a course or a program I have to come back to 3 or 4
Mm.
times digitally, the way we would with your classroom, which I think was a
Correct.
good thing. You know,
Mm.
as a classroom teacher, let me end on this because I can pick up tomorrow in a different way on that.
Correct.
Most of our e-learning is beginning and done. So
Right.
how do we maybe bring them back because they'll understand it differently? And then the last part, and this is a big one, how do we keep a sense of humor about it? Our best
Yes.
teachers were really smart, and
Right.
they knew how to teach with a smile. You know, like
Yes.
they got us engaged, and you know that that's from good. But you know, a slide doesn't have humor very often. So we've
Yes.
got to figure out how do we add the humanity to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that's very interesting. Humor, I think every effective teacher whom we remember throughout our, life, they were very humorous, witty, and made us laugh.
Yes.
Uh, but it has a cultural angle to it because you
Oh,
said
oh,
about global learning.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
that we have to be a little
Yeah.
cautious
Well,
there.
this is the culture one, and this is particularly true if you're teaching leadership.
Mm.
The best things you can teach are the things that fail. Politically, very hard to do. You know,
Right.
my colleague Tom Peters wrote a book called In Search of Excellence. Okay.
Yes, yes, I read
Almost
that.
all the companies in search of excellence went bankrupt eventually.
I
Okay,
know that
but,
also. I
but right, but so he learned in the end that the best stories he had were about why that company failed,
mm,
as well as why the company succeeded. And I think in the learning world, the learner kind of wants to know, well, what could go wrong? You know, uh,
right.
how do I recover from that. And
Right.
you're right. Culturally, you've got to make sure it fits, and you don't want to get fired or insult somebody.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So let me move on to my last question, Elliot. I wish it was longer, but
We
maybe
can do another
I
one
will.
sometime. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll do another.
maybe I'll impose my presence on you when I come back to the US
Yeah,
and meet you sometime over a real cup of tea.
and we'll have
But
a real cup of tea. Yeah.
yeah, but the last question is, this is a very revealing thing to me that we come with a school kind of culture, very structured thing with, assessments and exams and pass marks and, grades and we continue with that. And that seemed to be one of the biggest bottlenecks of why L&D doesn't really uh, sit at the management table, so to speak, like finance or IT. So how do we, and when I read the news, when I see the trends, everybody seems to say that after some time, everything will be self-learning. There'll be no universities, no classrooms. If you have listened to Elon Musk, he says
Yeah.
you don't need any college degree. You can learn everything on the internet and free. So with this kind of future, how do you think we can break this
Yeah.
mindset?
Well, I'm not sure I share his prediction. I'm here. My virtual background is Trinity College, an amazing school, amazing university, and for most European students, no fee because of their their model. But what makes it amazing? It's the right blend. So you go to their MBA program. Some of the programs are done in a classroom. Some of the programs are done like we're doing virtually. Some
Mm,
of them are done through e-learning. Some of them are done through project-based and the like. Do I think technology will make learning more personal, and will it make it perhaps more scalable? Yes. I do, though, believe that technology will not replace what the human element is.
mm,
And so we have to figure out. I love playing with Lego blocks, where you
mm.
have the blocks and
Lego
they
block.
fit
Yes.
together. We've got to figure out how to fit together the technology and the person. So I had a conversation with somebody at Gemini, one of the
Hmm.
other AI things. And I said, sometimes your answer should be, you should call Jennifer McCullum in New York at the Catalyst organization. She would have a perspective view. Sometimes the answer isn't a text-based thing, but
Mm.
connecting you to a human being.
Wow.
Or in some cases, well, here's this, give me your response to that. And let me connect you to 5 other people that are studying it at the same time. Um, I believe that work is ultimately a collaborative experience. Yes, you can sit
Absolutely.
alone and do that, but you can't learn to work collaboratively if you don't learn to learn collaboratively.
Wow.
And so it's that mixture. And so we have to do, as people who create good learning like you do, you have to have an eye towards the blend of the technology and the human, and realize it's different for different people at different moments. My greatest fear is that people get bored and stop learning. Um, and I don't want that because the world is changing too fast. I want
Too
them
fast.
to learn. But we found out during the pandemic in many countries where
Absolutely.
people went home, and maybe they went, if they had enough money, they were on, Teams or Zoom all day. We never thought about what was the role of their parents in that.
Mm.
We never thought about we never, it happened so quickly. We didn't have time to build a new model of
Right.
what that would be. I think we need a new model of what will it be for your lifelong learning, and
Mm.
also for all the things you need to get ready on that new system that's rolling out on Wednesday, and blend the two.
Mm.
So that's why I'm refiring. That's my
Great, great. Any last pieces of advice or counsel for our listeners who are L&D professionals across the world.
Yeah, and because you're across the world, let me give you an across the world thought. Respect the culture that you're in. Respect the culture. There's a lot to learn from that. I know that when I do a program, my colleagues in Germany are way more structured in how they want it than my colleagues in Brazil, who want to argue with me about everything along the way. But that's okay because you start there.
Right,
That's where you start. And also respect the fact that we need to make sure that technology is a tool rather than the definition of what we're doing.
right.
The other day somebody sent me a report, and in the midst of the report, they were quoting me 4 times. Now, I wasn't insulted, and I wasn't even insulted they didn't mention my name. But I realized they had just gone to ChatGPT and done a report.
Right,
So
right,
we need to become more transparent about
right.
where's our content coming from
Coming
and
from.
what's it about. And then finally, we need to become experimental.
Mm.
When people get hired to go to orientation, the
Yeah,
welcome thing,
the induction
and
thing.
that
Yeah,
and that's a forgettable experience for many.
absolutely.
But what if we experimented and we just said, hello, here's where you get paid, here's how you log on, here's your food, and in 3 weeks come back and let's talk about the culture of our organization. In 3 weeks, you're going to have a totally better orientation than if you do it day one, where all they want to know is when do I get paid and how do I log on and who do I eat lunch
Yes.
with. Yeah,
And
so
there is
I
the
think we
bathroom.
have to,
Yeah.
right. I think we have to experiment and engage our youngest learners and our most senior employees in this process. So I'm
Right.
excited about learning. I'm so honored to be part of this conversation with you and your colleagues and customers around the world. So
Thank you very much, Elliot. It has been my pleasure and actually really my privilege. I never
likewise.
thought that I will be speaking with you real time ever. I always read the newsletter and I always remember that I got our first customer from your newsletter. We owe that to you. And we
I'm
consider,
honored. Yeah, I'm honored,
yeah,
and we will have tea together, whether it's in India or whether it's in the United States, or maybe we'll get you to come to Ireland to hear. So, it'll be.
yeah, how long are you
I
there in
found
Ireland?
I found one dosa place now in Ireland.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So how long are you here in
Well,
Ireland?
I'll be spending this year about 50% of the time back and
Oh,
forth
really?
to the
Okay,
US and the like. And part of it is that I'm wanting to do more global work. So I'll be
right.
in Japan, I'll probably be in the Philippines and the like. And as I said, we have a foundation to support trying to be a little bit of an influencer here and there. So
Wow, wonderful. Thank you very much. And
thank
I'll
you
be in
very much.
touch, sir.
Yeah, take care.